Some people enter Harvard through the front gates, others through the back door. And then there are people like her, who slipped in each night through the service corridor, carrying nothing but a key card, a mop, and a dream she had not dared to speak aloud in years. Amira Collins pulled her faded work jacket tighter around her shoulders as she pushed open the heavy side door of Jefferson Hall, Harvard's austere science building. The clock above the marble corridor read 1:42 a.m. The air smelled faintly of old books, chalk dust, and winter seeping in through the high windows. To most of the world, these halls belonged to the privileged and the brilliant. To Amira, they were a place she polished until they gleamed, the kind of shine that would vanish by morning when students returned to scatter papers and arguments across the floor. Yet on nights like this, when the campus lay still and silent, the building felt as if it breathed differently. The emptiness whispered, and the chalkboard at the end of the lecture hall glowed faintly under the single bulb left burning. It was here that her secret life stirred. Amira guided her cart down the corridor, its wheels creaking against the polished stone. She unlocked the classroom door and stepped into the cavernous lecture hall. Desks rose in ascending tiers, shadows thrown across their wooden surfaces. And at the front, stretched across the entire blackboard, was a forest of symbols and equations, half erased, as if the mind that had written them had run out of time. Her steps slowed. She set the mop aside. Something in her chest tightened, the way a violin string hums when a note nearby is struck. On the board sprawled a system of nonlinear differential equations, expressions describing the way complex systems shifted, grew unstable, then settled again. To anyone else, it was chalk and dust. To Amira, it was the language she had once spoken fluently in high school, before her mother's illness forced her to abandon textbooks for cleaning shifts. Years had passed since then, yet the shapes on the board felt as familiar as a lullaby half-remembered. She touched the edge of the chalk tray. Her fingers closed around a fragment, small and fragile. The thought came unbidden. What if I tried? Her breath fogged in the cold air. She stared at the half-finished derivation, then began to write. At first, her hand trembled. She substituted variables, set x as the logarithmic function of the unstable component. The equations bent, shifted. She worked slowly, carefully, every line pulled from memory patched together from nights in the public library. Lectures watched on flickering screens long after the library staff had stopped noticing her. Minutes passed. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears. She invoked a Lyapunov function, recalling a theorem she had studied alone with no one to test her understanding, but the stubbornness that refused to let go. The chalk screeched across the board, sharp against silence. Then suddenly there it was, a simplification, a reduction into a form that hinted at stability where chaos had seemed inevitable. She stepped back, hardly believing it. Her entire body hummed with the electricity of the moment. That was when the door opened. The echo was soft, but in the vast hall it might as well have been thunder. She froze. The chalk falling from her hand, splitting into two pale shards on the floor. Professor Whitmore stood in the doorway. Tall, severe, his reputation preceded him, merciless with errors, impatient with mediocrity. By daylight, he was the terror of graduate students who stumbled beneath his questions. By night, he was not supposed to be here at all. Yet his eyes, sharp beneath the glint of spectacles, fixed on the writing at the board. Amira's throat closed. She stumbled toward the mop, words tumbling out. I was just cleaning, sir. I shouldn't have... Whitmore raised a hand, silencing her. His gaze did not leave the board. Slowly he approached, reading line by line. The room seemed to contract, as if even the air waited for his judgment. He picked up a fresh stick of chalk, checked her substitution, traced the path she had drawn. He stopped halfway, blinked, then tested the reduction himself. The silence stretched. Amira gripped the handle of the mop so tightly her knuckles turned white. At last, Whitmore turned. His expression had changed. It was no longer the cold scrutiny of a professor guarding the gates of knowledge. For the briefest instant, it was disbelief, followed by something rarer, almost fragile, recognition. "You did this?" His voice was low, incredulous. Amira swallowed. "I tried. I only wanted to see if it would work. I'm sorry, I'll wipe it off." "No." His tone cut sharp. "Do not touch it." The words hung in the air. Whitmore set the chalk down, eyes narrowing as if recalculating a sum not on the board but in his own mind. He studied her janitor's jacket, her tired face, the dust on her hands. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he said, "This is not the work of luck." The weight of that sentence pressed on Amira more than any rebuke could have. She felt her chest tighten, not with fear but with the trembling ache of possibility. But Whitmore's eyes hardened again, the moment concealed. "Remember this, Miss Collins," she whispered. "Miss Collins. One line of mathematics proves nothing. It takes years of discipline, of suffering to earn a single truth. Do not imagine this makes you anything yet." Amira lowered her gaze, cheeks burning. She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Whitmore lingered another second, then strode to the door. Before stepping out, he paused. Without turning, he spoke. "Leave the board as it is." The door closed, echoing in the hall. Amira stood in the silence that followed, heart racing. The chalk dust clung to her fingers like ashes, like fire. For the first time in years, she felt the faint but unmistakable outline of a door opening. Not the grand gates of Harvard, but something hidden, narrow, waiting only for the brave to step through. That night, long after her shift ended, Amira copied the equations into her battered notebook by the dim lamp in her rented room. She wrote each symbol carefully, as if it might vanish if she did not capture it quickly enough. And as the city slept, she whispered a promise to herself. She would not let this slip away. Some memories never fade, no matter how many nights you mop them away. For Amira, grief was not a wound that closed. It was a scar that lived under every breath, a reminder of the life she had once dreamed of and the price she had paid for love. It was 5 years earlier when everything had come undone. Her mother's cough had grown from nuisance to terror, the kind of cough that echoed in the small kitchen of their rented house and made every meal taste of fear. Doctors spoke in words that sounded clinical, almost distant. Stage 4, aggressive, limited options. They handed Amira stacks of forms and pamphlets filled with diagrams of cells multiplying beyond control. But behind those words was something simpler. Her mother was dying, and time was shorter than anyone wanted to admit. Amira had been 17 then, standing at the edge of a different future. She had already been admitted to a state university with a full scholarship for mathematics. Teachers called her a prodigy, the kind of student who could see solutions before the rest of the class had finished reading the problem. There had even been whispers that with the right mentorship, she might one day compete for the Putnam, the famed collegiate math competition that produced legends. But none of that mattered when her mother could not get out of bed. The scholarship letter lay folded in her backpack as she learned to measure out pills, track dosages, and soothe fevers with towels dipped in cold water. While her classmates were packing dorm supplies and taking photos in college sweatshirts, Amira was working 2 shifts at a diner to pay for medication insurance would not cover. Her world shrank to the 4 walls of their modest home, where every cough echoed like a countdown. One evening, she sat by her mother's bedside. The lamp cast a soft circle of light, barely cutting through the shadows. Her mother, skin pale and eyes luminous with pain, reached out a trembling hand. "Don't give up your future, Amira," she whispered. But Amira only shook her head. "There is no future if you're not in it." When her mother passed away months later, the silence in the house was unbearable. The day after the funeral, Amira opened the scholarship envelope one last time. The paper felt heavier than stone. She folded it carefully, slid it into a box with her mother's letters, and closed the lid. She never opened it again. Years blurred after that. Amira took jobs, anything that would pay rent, anything that would cover the cost of sending money to her younger sister, who was still in school back in their hometown. Waitressing, housekeeping, stocking shelves overnight. By the time she found the janitorial position at Harvard, she was used to invisibility. People rarely noticed the one pushing a mop, and that anonymity became her shield. But the hunger to learn never left. In the evenings before her shift, she would sit at the public library, absorbing online lectures on differential geometry, algebraic topology, mathematical biology. She copied proofs in her spiral notebooks, her handwriting crowded but precise. Each page was a battlefield where she fought to keep alive the part of herself that had once been destined for something more. On winter nights, after long shifts, she would call her younger sister Lena back home. The calls were short because minutes cost money, but they were lifelines. "How is school?" Amira would ask, forcing her voice to sound lighter than it felt. "It's hard," Lena admitted once, "but I'm trying, just like you taught me." There would be a pause. Then Amira whispered, "I clean floors now, Lena, but I also study. I don't want to forget who I am. Promise me you won't forget either." Her sister's voice trembled through the static. "I won't." That night, after the encounter with Professor Whitmore, Amira sat at her tiny kitchen table, the letter from Harvard Extension School brochure spread beside her. She had picked it up months earlier at the library, but never believed she had a right to even glance at it. Now, Whitmore's words, "Do not touch the board," echoed in her ears. He had not dismissed her. He had seen something. But doubt was louder than hope. Who was she to imagine belonging here? She was a janitor, a high school dropout, a girl who had spent her brightest years mixing cleaning solutions instead of variables. The wounds of her past throbbed with every thought of stepping forward. She closed her eyes, and in the dark, she remembered her mother's hand, frail yet steady on hers. "Don't give up your future, Amira." Tears pressed hot against her eyes. She whispered into the silence of the room, to the ghost of the woman who had given her everything. "I still carry it, Mama. I never gave it up. I just don't know how to begin again." The next evening, as she polished the marble floors of Jefferson Hall, the echo of her mop strokes rang like metronome beats, steady and relentless. Students hurried past without looking, wrapped in scarves and ambition. To them, she was background. To herself, she was both custodian and prisoner, trapped between what she had been and what she still longed to be. And yet, under that uniform, a quiet resolve smoldered. Grief had bent her life out of shape, but it had not extinguished the fire. Somewhere beneath the scar of loss, the wound of sacrifice still whispered with pain, but it also whispered with promise. The board had waited for her once. Maybe, just maybe, it would again. Some challenges arrive as tests on paper, others as storms in life. But once in a while, the two merge, and a single sheet of equations becomes a mirror of everything you have lost and everything you still dare to hope. The next night, Jefferson Hall was silent again. Amira pushed open the heavy lecture hall door, expecting nothing but chalk dust and echo. Instead, she found something waiting for her. On the desk, Where professors usually left notes for teaching assistants, lay a single sheet of paper folded in half. No signature, no heading, only a crisp set of equations written in Whitmore's severe, slanted handwriting. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. The problem was not from any textbook she had ever seen. It was a non-linear optimization challenge, an attempt to minimize a function under tangled constraints, an equation whose surface looked simple, but whose depths were treacherous. Amira sat in the front row, the mop forgotten. The notation was precise. Minimize fxy equal x squared y squared, subject to the constraint g xy equals e to the power of xy minus x minus y equals 0. She whispered the words aloud, as if naming them gave her courage. She had seen versions of this problem in advanced calculus references, but not at this level. To most, it was a tangle of impossibility. To her, it was a puzzle that sang like music she had once known by heart. She pulled out her notebook, the cheap spiral-bound one she always carried. Her pencil scratched furiously. She began with Lagrange multipliers, the formal path. Define Lxy lambda equal x squared plus y squared plus lambda multiplied by e to the power of xy minus x minus y. Differentiate with respect to x and y, set conditions to 0. The algebra exploded across the page, threatening to overwhelm her. For a moment, panic rose. She saw herself again at her mother's bedside, textbooks closed, the scholarship slipping from her grasp. She heard the echo of Jason Miller's mocking voice from the other day, "Janitor doing calculus. Cute." She closed her eyes, breathed. Then she let go of the rules. Instead of chasing the algebra straight on, she tried substitution, imagining the geometry of the problem. What if x and y balanced each other through symmetry? What if she explored the line x equals y? On that line, the constraint became e to the power of x squared minus 2, x equals 0. Not solvable by hand, but revealing, near x equals about 1.5, the condition held. Plugging back, she got an approximate point, a candidate for a minimum. She sketched the curve, its rise and fall. It was not the complete solution, but it was a direction no standard student would take. It was intuition, a voice telling her the system whispered its answer sideways. A sound behind her. She turned, heart leaping. Whitmore stood at the back row, his hands clasped behind him, face unreadable. He descended slowly, like a judge entering a courtroom. Amira's pencil stilled. I did not mean to intrude," she said softly. "It was just there. On the desk." "I put it there," Whitmore interrupted. His voice carried no warmth, only the weight of intent. "I wanted to see if you would touch it." Amira's fingers tightened on her notebook. "I tried, but I do not think I solved it. I only found a direction." "Show me." She handed him the notebook with trembling hands. He flipped through the pages, pausing at her symmetry argument. His eyes narrowed, tracing the sketch she had drawn. "You abandoned the formal method halfway." "I did," Amira admitted. "It was drowning me. But sometimes when I cannot solve a problem directly, I try to listen for its shape. Equations, they have a kind of rhythm. I thought maybe symmetry could tell me where to look." Whitmore closed the notebook. His silence stretched so long Amira wanted to sink into the floor. Finally, he spoke. "That is not how mathematicians are trained." Her heart sank. She lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." But then he added, almost reluctantly, "Yet it is how they are sometimes born." Her head snapped up. For the first time, his gaze softened, Not much, but enough to reveal something beyond disdain. He handed back the notebook. Your method is incomplete. It lacks rigor, but it also shows instinct. Instinct cannot be taught. He stepped back, adjusting his glasses. Do not confuse this with success. One spark is not a fire. But perhaps... He trailed off. Amira swallowed hard, her voice breaking. Professor, why give me this problem? I am just the janitor. Whitmore's eyes fixed on her. Because brilliance does not care about job titles. Either you have it or you do not. And I needed to know which it was. He turned to leave. At the door, without looking back, he said, Be here tomorrow. Midnight. Then he was gone. Amira sat frozen, her notebook heavy in her hands. Her chest rose and fell with a rhythm she could not control. She felt like a door had just opened again, this time not silently, but with deliberate invitation. The board still glowed with her unfinished work. The mop leaned against the wall, forgotten. For the first time in years, Amira allowed herself to whisper aloud the truth she had buried. I still belong here. Some doors swing open with ceremony, polished brass and applause. Others open quietly, almost reluctantly, as if testing whether the one standing before them has the courage to step inside. For Amira Collins, the door that opened was neither grand nor gilded. It was a folded sheet of paper slipped into her mop cart, with a single line written in Whitmore's sharp hand. Harvard Extension. Midnight exam. You will sit for it. Amira stared at the note for a long time, her hands trembling. The words did not invite. They commanded. She was not sure if it was kindness, challenge, or a trap. Yet beneath her fear stirred something older than both doubt and despair. A chance, however fragile, had appeared. That night she pushed her cart through Jefferson Hall with a different rhythm. Her mop strokes moved quickly, her heart racing ahead of them. For the first time, the marble corridors no longer felt like a fortress. They felt like a waiting ground. The days that followed blurred into a relentless cycle. By morning, Amira worked her cleaning routes across campus dormitories, vacuuming carpets still littered with pizza boxes and energy drink cans. The smell of coffee clung to her clothes as she pushed trash bins heavier than her frame. Her hands cracked from bleach. By evening, she returned to her small rented room with its flickering lamp, collapsing for an hour of sleep that felt more like fainting than rest. And then, when midnight drew near, she rose again. Her desk was a battlefield of worn notebooks, each page filled with equations pressed so tightly they looked like scripture. She tackled differential equations until her pencil tip broke. She recited definitions of compactness, continuity, convexity, and theorems about optimization, whispering the lines as though they were prayers. When her eyelids sank, she forced herself to stand, pacing the small room with a book in hand. She boiled noodles for fuel, scribbled integrals on the back of envelopes, then copied them neatly into her notebook, afraid that losing order would mean losing control. The body protested. Some nights, she shook with exhaustion, forehead pressed to the cool surface of her desk. Her hands bore blisters from mopping and calluses from writing, both pains layered into one. But always, she returned to the page. The city outside never noticed. But the building's night guard did. A broad man with a kind face, he often found her bent over a notebook during her break in Jefferson Hall. One night he chuckled, handing her a cup of coffee from the vending machine. You never stop, do you? He said. Amira looked up, startled. Stop what? Studying. You're like a ghost around here, always scribbling when everyone else is asleep. The ghost of Jefferson Hall, that's what I'll call you. Amira laughed softly, though her eyes stung. A ghost, maybe, but even ghosts want to be heard sometimes. The night of the exam came with a snowfall. Harvard Yard lay quiet, paths muffled by fresh white drifts. Amira entered the assigned classroom with her ID badge clipped nervously to her jacket. Her work shoes squeaked on the polished floor. The exam proctor, a stern woman in glasses, looked at her without expression, only noting her name. There were no introductions, no explanations. A thick packet of problems was set before her. The clock struck midnight. Amira opened the first page. Optimization, probability theory, real analysis. Each problem was a mountain range, jagged and steep. She felt her throat close. For a moment, her mind flashed to her mop leaning in the supply closet, her life of invisibility. "You do not belong here," the old voice hissed. But then, from somewhere deep, another voice rose, her mother's. "Do not give up your future, Amira." Her pencil touched the page. Line by line, she began. Hours slipped past. She moved from Lagrange multipliers to Fourier analysis, from proofs of convergence to applied models of population growth. Sometimes she faltered, erased, rewrote. Other times her hand moved swiftly, the answer blooming as if it had been waiting all along. By the time she reached the final problem, dawn was threatening the horizon. Her body ached, but her eyes burned with an unfamiliar clarity. The last question was open-ended, not calculation but reflection. Why does mathematics matter? Amira stared at the words. She thought of her childhood, when numbers were a playground. She thought of the scholarship letter folded away, never used. She thought of her mop, her cart, her nights alone with equations. Then she wrote slowly, carefully. Mathematics matters because it is the one language that refuses to lie. It takes chaos and asks for order. It takes loss and asks for what remains. When life tears everything apart, mathematics offers the proof that something can still hold. For me, it is not only truth, it is survival. She set down her pencil as the clock struck 4. Her hand shook from fatigue, but her heart carried a strange calm. The proctor collected her papers without comment. Amira walked out into the frozen morning, the snow crunching beneath her shoes. The campus towers loomed above her, golden light beginning to spill from their windows. She drew her jacket close, breath rising in clouds, and whispered into the pale dawn. "I did not come through the front gate. But I am here." Some victories shine only for a moment before the shadows gather. For Amira Collins, the days after the exam felt like living between two worlds, one of hope, fragile and trembling, and another of contempt, sharp and merciless. The results of the midnight test were not yet released, but something had shifted. When Amira walked into Jefferson Hall now, she no longer felt only like a ghost. She carried inside her the memory of that long night, of the exam questions that had bowed to her persistence. But Harvard was not a place that gave freely, and for every open door there were eyes ready to slam it shut. Jason Miller first noticed her one afternoon when he arrived early for his seminar. He was the kind of student the university brochure quietly boasted about. Tall, well-dressed, heir to a family name etched on one of the campus buildings. He had never mopped a floor in his life, but he had once bragged that his father had mopped the floor with rivals in business deals. He found Amira in the lecture hall, kneeling to polish the brass rail along the staircase. Her faded work jacket clung to her frame, hair tied back in a no-nonsense knot. She looked up, startled. Jason smirked. "Janitor in Jefferson. Cute. What are you doing here at this hour? Practicing for the calculus Olympics with your mop?" Amira flushed, gripping her rag. She wanted to disappear into the floor she had just polished. But before she could reply, Whitmore entered carrying a stack of papers. Jason straightened, his mocking grin slipping into the smooth confidence he wore in class. "Professor," he said, "I did not know we let the cleaning staff audit seminars now." Whitmore's eyes flicked from Jason to Amira. His face gave nothing away, but his pause was long enough for Amira to feel the weight of it. He moved to the desk and set his papers down. "Miss Collins will be joining us for a while," he said curtly. "That is all you need to know." Jason's brows rose. He hid a laugh with a cough. "Of course, Professor. Always glad to see diversity in the classroom." The words stung, but Amira said nothing. She took a seat in the back, notebook on her lap, head bowed. The seminar began. It was a group problem-solving session on Fourier transforms and their applications in signal processing. Whitmore divided the class into teams of 3, assigning each group a problem that required both theory and application. Jason's group, stacked with 2 other polished students, quickly spread their laptops and textbooks. Amira's team consisted of only herself. Jason had made sure no one invited her. As the room buzzed with discussion, Amira studied the problem alone. The question asked them to decompose a function into its frequency components, to identify hidden periodicities in noisy data. For most, it was just math. For her, it was memory. Nights in the library watching recorded lectures about how Fourier analysis could pull music out of static or detect a heartbeat in a cloud of noise. Her pencil flew. She set up the integral, carefully defined the orthogonal basis functions, and computed coefficients. When the algebra tangled, she redrew the function's shape, imagining how each sine and cosine wave stacked together like threads in a woven cloth. She worked with the intensity of someone who had waited years for this one chance to speak the language she loved. Jason, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, whispering jokes to his teammates. He barely touched the equations, leaving the grunt work to them. At the end of the session, Whitmore called for presentations. Jason strode to the board, flashing his confident grin. He scribbled a half-finished derivation, making broad claims. As you can see, the decomposition shows the dominant frequency at approximately 3 pi over 4. This result, while preliminary, demonstrates the principle. Whitmore's face was unreadable. "Preliminary indeed," he said. "The integral is incomplete. Your coefficients are inconsistent." Jason blinked, then laughed as if it were a minor detail. "Of course, we were short on time. Time," Whitmore cut in, "was equal for all groups." He turned his gaze to the room. "Does anyone have a correct solution?" Silence. Students glanced at each other, uncomfortable. Then, slowly, Amira raised her hand. Her heart pounded in her ears. Whitmore nodded once. "Miss Collins?" She walked to the board, gripping her notebook. The chalk felt heavy in her hand. She wrote carefully, line by line, laying out the decomposition with precision. Her handwriting was small, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had copied proofs in secret for years. She showed the integrals, the coefficients, the final reconstruction of the function. Finally, she circled the result. The dominant frequency, correct to the decimal, clean and unambiguous. The room was silent. Whitmore studied the board for a long moment. Then, without looking at Jason, he said, "This is the correct solution." A ripple moved through the students. Jason's jaw tightened. He forced a smile, but it looked brittle. "Impressive," he said lightly. "For someone with a mop." But his eyes burned with something darker than mockery. It was the look of someone who felt his throne was being threatened. Amira stepped back from the board, cheeks hot. She did not answer him. Instead, she returned to her seat in the back, notebook clutched tightly to her chest. For the first time, her work had been seen not in secret, not in shadows, but under the light of the classroom. And even though Jason's eyes dripped with disdain, the sound of Whitmore's words, "This is the correct solution," echoed louder in her soul. That night, as she pushed her mop down the marble hallways, Amira whispered to herself, "They can laugh, they can sneer, but the numbers, Do not lie. And deep inside, the wound of humiliation carried a seed of fire. Some treasures do not glimmer with gold or silver. They wait in silence, folded in old paper, carrying words that outlive the voice that once spoke them. Winter had deepened in Cambridge. Snow pressed against the windows of Jefferson Hall, muffling the city in white silence. Amira's nights had become heavier. She still scrubbed marble floors until her shoulders ached, still studied until her vision blurred. But inside she carried something else now, a storm stirred by Jason's eyes, by the sting of contempt, by the sudden realization that she was no longer invisible. She had solved the problem in front of them all. She had heard Whitmore say it aloud, "This is the correct solution." Yet instead of triumph, the memory churned with fear. To be seen was also to be hunted. One evening, Whitmore called her to his office. The room was lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, every inch crowded with books. The smell of leather and dust mingled with chalk. He gestured for her to sit, his expression unreadable. Amira sat stiffly, notebook clutched to her lap. She expected correction, perhaps dismissal. Instead, Whitmore opened a thin file. Her file. "I looked into your past," he said, voice flat. Amira's chest tightened. "My past?" "You were admitted to university once, on full scholarship. You never attended. Records show your mother's illness. The trail ends there." She lowered her gaze. "I had to choose." "Yes," Whitmore said. "And you chose her." The silence stretched. Then he slid a small envelope across the desk. Yellowed with time, edges soft from being held. "This was left in your high school file," he said. "I believe it belongs to you." Amira frowned, reaching with trembling hands. The handwriting on the envelope made her throat close. It was her mother's. She opened it slowly, as though afraid it would vanish. Inside, a folded sheet of lined paper. She unfolded it, and the words leapt at her like a voice from the grave. "My Amira, if you are reading this, it means I could not stay as long as I wanted, and it means you have not let go of your books. I know you. Even if life bends you, you will carry them. You will carry numbers the way others carry prayers. I want you to remember, you are more than what the world sees. They may see a girl, poor, tired, holding a broom, but I have seen the way you hold a pencil. That is the true picture of you. Do not bury yourself, my light. Do not believe you must trade your future for survival forever. If you are reading this, it means you still have hope. And if you still have hope, then I am still with you. With love that will never leave you, Mama." The words blurred as tears flooded her eyes. She pressed the letter to her chest, shaking. "I thought I had lost everything," she whispered. "But she left this for me." Whitmore's face remained stern, yet his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "She believed in you, more than you believe in yourself." Amira looked at him through tears. "Why are you giving this to me now?" He leaned back, eyes distant. "Because I needed to know whether you had already given up." "That letter proves you have not." Amira's hands tightened around the fragile paper. She felt her mother's presence in the words, as though the letter had been waiting all these years for this exact night, this exact hour. That evening, she returned to her small rented room. She cleared her desk of notebooks and cleaning supplies, laying the letter carefully in the center. She read it again and again, her tears staining the paper. Then she whispered into the dim light, "I will not give up, Mama. Not now. Not ever. I promise." The next day, as she scrubbed the marble floor, the words still echoed within her. Jason's sneer, the exhaustion of endless nights, the hunger gnawing in her body, All of it was still there, but beneath it pulsed something stronger. Her mother had left her not money, not possessions, but a compass. A reason to keep walking through corridors where she did not belong. And as she pushed her cart down the long hall, students passing without notice, Amira whispered with a steadiness she had not felt in years, "The floor will shine tonight, but so will I." Some trials are not meant to measure what you know. They are meant to strip you bare, to ask whether your soul itself can stand the weight of the question. The invitation arrived not in gold lettering, but in a plain envelope slid under her door. Inside, a single line of instruction. Admittance exam, Harvard Mathematics Division. Location, Sever Hall. Time, 7:00 a.m. Amira sat with the paper in her hands, her pulse quickening. This was not the midnight test Whitmore had arranged in shadows. This was official, public, merciless. A trial by fire in daylight. The morning of the exam, the campus sparkled with frost. Sever Hall rose against the pale sky like a fortress of red brick. Students filed in wearing scarves, tailored coats, eyes sharp with confidence. Amira, in her faded jacket and worn shoes, walked among them like an intruder. She carried only a pencil case and the letter from her mother, folded carefully in her pocket. Inside the hall, the atmosphere throbbed with tension. Long desks stretched beneath the vaulted ceiling, exam papers face down before each seat. At the front, a panel of faculty waited, Whitmore among them, his expression unreadable. The proctor's voice cut through the murmurs. "You may begin." Papers turned in unison. Amira's eyes fell on the first problem. It was not elementary. It was a beast. Problem 1. Explore the implications of the Riemann hypothesis for the distribution of prime numbers, and demonstrate how any partial result might contribute to error estimates in number theory. Her chest tightened. The Riemann hypothesis. One of the most famous unsolved problems in mathematics. A conjecture that had defeated generations. To most students here, the question was a cruelty, a trap meant to humble. Amira set her pencil down. She knew she could not solve the hypothesis. No one had. But the question was not about conquest. It was about understanding. She began slowly, carefully writing definitions. She explained how the non-trivial zeros of the zeta function were conjectured to lie on the critical line, and how this structure governed the spacing of prime numbers. Her mind worked like a lantern swinging in darkness. She recalled the nights in the public library when she had read essays on the problem, fascinated by its blend of mystery and necessity. She wrote of how better bounds on the distribution of primes shaped cryptography, computer science, and even the randomness of nature. Line by line, she transformed impossibility into clarity. She did not prove the hypothesis, but she showed she understood its heartbeat. Hours slipped past. Each problem was harder than the last. A question on functional analysis, a problem linking topology to quantum models, an applied task requiring the modeling of epidemic spread. Her body screamed with fatigue, but her pencil did not stop. Then, near the end, she reached the final page. Final question. Why does mathematics matter? Her hand trembled. She had seen this before, in Whitmore's midnight exam. But now it was not only Whitmore asking. It was Harvard itself. She paused. Around her, students wrote with swift confidence, some with rehearsed eloquence. Amira closed her eyes. She thought of the mop in her hand, the nights she had spent cleaning while equations called from the blackboard. She thought of her mother's letter, still warm against her chest. She thought of Jason's sneer, of the laughter that tried to erase her. And then she wrote, Mathematics matters because it is the one field where truth cannot be bought or inherited. It is the same in every language, in every country, for every child who dares to ask why. It matters because it turns silence into song, patterns into proof. For me, it matters because when grief stripped me of everything, mathematics remained, patient and waiting. It has been my refuge, my compass, and my promise. I may never solve its greatest mysteries, but it has already solved mine, that I was never meant to live without it. She set her pencil down as the proctor called time. The room emptied. Amira lingered, exhausted, staring at her paper stacked among the others. As she gathered her things, a voice spoke behind her. One of the faculty, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, said with disdain, "Harvard must be lowering its standards if we are inviting cleaning staff to these tables." The words sliced deep. Amira froze. Before she could respond, Whitmore's voice cut through, calm but edged like steel. "No. Harvard is remembering its standards. Talent without privilege is the truest measure of why we exist." The gray-haired professor scoffed, but Whitmore's eyes remained fixed on Amira. Not warm, not kind, but steady. A recognition that burned brighter than any insult. Outside, the winter sun broke weakly through clouds. Amira stood on the steps of Seaver Hall, breath turning to mist, heart trembling. The exam was over. She had given everything. Whether it was enough, she did not know. But for the first time, she felt that she had stood not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as herself. And that was already a kind of victory. Some storms do not roar with thunder. They spread quietly, like ink through water, until suddenly the whole sea is dark. The results came 2 weeks later. On a frigid morning, Amira received a thin envelope in her rented room. She turned it over in her hands, her heart hammering. Thin envelopes often meant rejection, but when she tore it open, the words struck like lightning. "Congratulations. You have achieved the highest score in the examination cohort." For a long moment she simply sat, staring at the paper. Then she pressed the letter to her chest, shaking with relief, with disbelief, with joy she had almost forgotten how to feel. Her mother's note lay on the desk, and she whispered, "Mama, I did it. I am not only surviving, I am becoming." But Harvard was not a place that celebrated such victories without resistance. News spread quickly through the mathematics division, the janitor who had outscored the brightest students. At first there was curiosity, then came whispers, then laughter, then sharper words. And at the center of the storm was Jason Miller. Jason had barely passed the exam. His family's influence and his own polished arrogance had carried him through years where others would have faltered. Now, for the first time, he was eclipsed. And not by a rival from another elite family, but by a woman he deemed invisible. He began to sow doubt, quietly at first. "She must have had help," he murmured to classmates. "Maybe Whitmore slipped her the problems early." Soon the whispers hardened. "She plagiarized. Look at her notebooks. Too neat. Too rehearsed. No janitor solves the Riemann hypothesis question that cleanly." The rumors spread like wildfire. One afternoon, Amira was called into a small conference room. Around the table sat 3 faculty members, Whitmore among them, his face stone. Jason was there too, lounging back in his chair, arms crossed, a smile flickering at the corner of his lips. The gray-haired professor who had once sneered at her began. "Miss Collins, there have been allegations, plagiarism, academic dishonesty. We take such matters seriously." Amira's stomach twisted. "Plagiarism? But I—" Jason leaned forward, voice dripping with false concern. No offense, but come on. We are supposed to believe a janitor pulled off the top score? She must have copied someone's work, maybe even mine. Her hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to shout, to cry, but her voice came out steady. I did not cheat. Every line is mine. Every mistake, every correction. I worked alone. Whitmore finally spoke, his voice calm but sharp. We can verify. Bring her notebooks. Amira pulled them from her bag, spiral-bound, cheap, pages packed with years of cramped writing. The professors flipped through them, dates scrawled in corners, calculations layered, half-crossed attempts, corrected lines. The timestamps matched the progression of her learning. Every struggle, every false start, every small breakthrough. Then Whitmore produced something else. The logs from the public library computers where she had accessed online lectures, the timestamps showing her nightly routine, stretching back years. Hard to plagiarize years of persistence, he said quietly. The room fell silent. Jason's smirk faltered. Finally, the gray-haired professor cleared his throat. The evidence is clear. There is no misconduct here. Miss Collins, you are absolved. Jason rose abruptly. This is ridiculous. You are letting sentiment cloud. Enough. Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. Excellence does not require your permission, Mr. Miller. Jason froze, anger burning in his eyes, then stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Amira sat stunned. She had expected to be crushed, expelled, erased. Instead, for the first time, her truth had been defended not in whispers but before a council. As the professors filed out, Whitmore lingered. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite name, still stern, but with a glimmer of something softer. You are not here by accident, he said. You earned this. Do not forget that, even when others try to erase it. Amira nodded, tears threatening. Thank you. Whitmore turned, his coat sweeping behind him, and left. That night, back in her room, Amira placed her exam letter beside her mother's note. 2 pieces of paper, fragile yet indestructible, proof of a promise kept. The storm of rumors had not broken her. It had tested her, and though the whispers would continue, she knew now that her voice carried weight enough to answer them. She whispered into the silence, "The numbers speak for me. They always will." Some offers arrive dressed as triumph, but carry the weight of chains. Winter was beginning to loosen its grip on Cambridge. Snow melted into muddy patches on Harvard Yard, and the bells in Memorial Church rang brighter in the thin spring air. For Amira Collins, however, the world still felt uncertain. She had survived Jason's accusations. Her notebooks had spoken for her, and the faculty had affirmed her innocence. For the first time, she could walk into a lecture hall without lowering her gaze. Then the letter came. It was heavier than any she had received before, embossed with a seal. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The Newton-Hawking Fellowship Committee is pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a candidate for our program. Amira read it again and again, scarcely believing the words. The Newton-Hawking Fellowship, reserved for the most promising young minds in mathematics and physics, a gateway to mentorship, funding, research without limits. For years, she had only read about the fellowship in library articles, names of recipients whispered with awe. Now her own name sat printed in black ink, formal and undeniable. Her first thought was of her mother. "Mama, look, the world is opening." The interview took place in a glass-walled office overlooking the Charles River. 3 committee members sat across from her, their smiles polished, their voices smooth. "You have remarkable resilience," one said. "From janitorial work to the top of the exam cohort. Truly inspiring." Your instinct for unsolved problems is rare, another added. We see potential for groundbreaking research. Amira listened, heart swelling. Every word felt like a dream realized. But then came the conditions. We must discuss the fellowship's terms, the chairwoman said. The program is rigorous, demanding. Recipients must devote themselves fully. That means leaving behind distractions. Distractions? Amira asked quietly. Your current employment, for one. We expect you to resign from janitorial duties. Your image must reflect the fellowship's stature. And, if we are frank, your background should remain discreet. Sponsors prefer a clean narrative, a story of brilliance, not of hardship. The words landed like stones. You are asking me to erase who I am, Amira said. Not erase, the chairwoman replied smoothly. Reframe. You will live in residence, travel internationally, represent the fellowship. The world will know you only as a mathematician. Isn't that what you want? Amira's chest tightened. She thought of Lena, her younger sister, still in their hometown, waiting for the money Amira sent each month. She thought of the night guard who called her the ghost of Jefferson Hall. She thought of the mop, the endless nights, the letter from her mother that had kept her alive. If she accepted, she could step into a future her younger self had once dreamed of. But to do so, she would have to turn her back on the very life that had forged her. That evening, she sat in her small rented room. The fellowship letter lay beside her mother's note. She read one, then the other. You must leave the past behind, the fellowship seemed to say. Do not bury yourself, my light, her mother's note answered. Amira closed her eyes. She remembered the nights scrubbing marble floors until her hands bled. She remembered Jason's sneers, the whispers of doubt, the exam at dawn when she had written why mathematics mattered. She remembered her mother's last words. If you are reading this, it means you still have hope. Slowly, she took up her pen. She wrote her reply in careful script. The next morning, in the fellowship office, the committee read her letter aloud. I am honored by your offer, but I cannot accept a future that demands I sever myself from my past. My work as a janitor did not diminish my mathematics. It preserved it. My struggles did not distract from my studies. They deepened them. To erase that is to erase the very soil from which my hunger for knowledge grew. If brilliance requires amnesia, then it is not brilliance at all. I choose to carry both, the mop and the chalk, the grief and the proof. That is the mathematician I am. Silence followed. The committee members exchanged looks of disbelief. One shook his head. Another sighed, disappointed. But for Amira, there was no regret. As she walked out of the glass building, the Charles River shimmered with early spring light. The air was cold, but her chest was warm. She whispered, almost smiling, I am not choosing less. I am choosing whole. Some legacies are not built with marble halls or golden plaques. They are built with hands that once carried a broom, now carrying chalk, and with voices that once whispered, now daring to teach aloud. The semester was drawing to a close when Professor Whitmore summoned Amira to his office. She entered cautiously, as always, notebook in hand. He sat behind his desk, spectacles low on his nose, a stack of papers beside him. Without looking up, he said, I will not be lecturing tomorrow. You will take my place. Amira froze. Me? Professor, I cannot. You can, Whitmore interrupted. And you will. They need to see more than theorems. They need to see what persistence looks like. She stood in silence, her heart racing. He finally raised his eyes, and though his face remained stern, there was something unmistakable behind the severity. Trust. The next morning, Amira entered Jefferson Hall not with a mop or a cart, but with a bundle of notes and chalk in her trembling hand. The lecture hall buzzed with students, their voices filling the space. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with skepticism. Jason was absent. His suspension had been confirmed after the plagiarism council. She stepped to the blackboard. For a moment, the chalk felt heavier than the broom ever had. Her breath caught. The old fear rose. You do not belong here. Then she remembered her mother's letter, folded in her pocket. She drew strength from the words, "Do not bury yourself, my light." She wrote on the board, her handwriting steady. From equations to endurance. Why we keep solving. The room quieted. Amira turned to face them. Her voice trembled at first, but soon steadied. I used to enter this hall when it was empty, long after midnight. I was not a student then. I was a janitor. My job was to erase the chalk from these boards. But one night, I realized I could not only erase. I could add. I could write. A ripple moved through the students. Amira continued. Mathematics is not only about numbers, it is about courage. Every unsolved problem is a wall that dares us to climb. Every theorem is a reminder that truth waits patient until we are ready to see it. I cleaned these floors for years, but even while scrubbing, my mind was solving. And that is what I want you to remember. Where you are is not who you are. She turned back to the board, working through a problem on stability analysis. Her lines of chalk were clear, methodical. She explained each step slowly, not only proving, but translating, offering metaphors, reminding them that mathematics was not a foreign tongue, but a way of seeing. When she set down the chalk, the hall was silent. Then, one by one, hands came together. Applause rose, filling the vaulted room. Some students stood. Amira blinked back tears. For the first time, she stood not in shadow, but in light. Weeks passed. She declined the fellowship again, politely but firmly, this time in person. She told them, "My past is not a stain. It is my proof. Without it, my work has no root." Word spread. Some admired her courage, others called her foolish. But Amira no longer wavered. She had chosen her path. Months later, in a quiet neighborhood far from Harvard's towers, the door of a small community center opened to the glow of lamplight. Inside, desks were arranged in neat rows. A blackboard stood at the front, and Amira Collins waited, chalk in hand. Her students arrived slowly. Single mothers, factory workers just off their shifts, teenagers who had left school too early, men with calloused hands from construction. They carried weariness, but also a spark in their eyes. Amira greeted each one warmly. She began with simple algebra, explaining carefully, listening patiently. She saw herself in every tired face, every hesitant question. And when one young boy asked, "Why does this even matter?" Amira smiled, the same smile her mother once gave her. Because mathematics reminds us that even in chaos, there is order. Even when life feels unsolvable, there is always a way forward. Can you see? That is why we keep learning. The room glowed with understanding. Later that night, when the students had gone, Amira stayed behind to clean the board. She paused, chalk dust on her hands, and whispered into the empty room, "Courage is not certainty. Courage is walking into the classroom even when your hands are still rough from the broom." Outside, the streetlights hummed softly. The small building stood plain and unremarkable, but inside, the fire of knowledge had been lit. And so the girl who once entered Harvard through the service corridor had opened her own door, wide enough for everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. Thank you for staying with me, for walking through the journey of Amira Collins. From the nights when she held a mop in the empty halls of Harvard, to the moment she held chalk before a class, proving that knowledge and courage can turn even the darkest hours into light. If this story has brought you a little warmth, a little hope that no matter our age or the weight of our past, learning and resilience will always guide us forward, I invite you to subscribe. One small click, yet to us it means companionship. It means you wish to keep listening to more stories like this, quiet flames to gather around, as if we were sitting together by a winter fireplace. Thank you, and I hope to see you again in the next story.